She stood there like any other traveler, quietly waiting for her flight amidst the noise and bustle of a busy airport. Dressed sharply, carrying herself with composed grace, she looked like someone with places to be and things to accomplish. But to two airport security officers and one bitter, entitled white woman, her very presence, a poised, successful black woman, was not just unusual, it was unbearable. To them, she was a question mark in their world of assumptions, an anomaly they couldn't accept. Without any cause, they singled her out, demanding to know how she could afford a business class ticket. They interrogated her about her income, her purpose, her identity. Questions drenched in condescension. Questions no white passenger ever got asked. When she calmly but firmly challenged the injustice, demanding nothing more than basic human respect, the situation spiraled. Slurs, ugly venomous slurs, were hurled at her in front of a stunned crowd. Her skin color became the target of their rage, their bias suddenly exposed like raw nerves. They barked threats, shouted insults, then did the unthinkable, handcuffed her like a criminal. Right there, in front of hundreds of witnesses. Her dignity was shattered in that moment, dragged down by the heavy chains of someone else's ignorance. But what those officers didn't realize was this. They had just made the biggest mistake of their careers. Because the woman they just humiliated wasn't just a passenger. She wasn't just some black woman. She was Audrey Hayes, one of the highest-ranking federal judges in the United States. And her story was about to explode in a way that would forever stain the reputations of those who tried to tear her down. Rewind to earlier that same day. It was a typical Friday afternoon at the international airport, a whirlwind of movement and sound. Announcements echoed from loudspeakers in English and several other languages, a testament to the diversity swarming through its wide glass doors. Laughter mingled with the rumble of suitcase wheels. The aroma of fast food, perfume, coffee, and sterile air conditioning filled the space. Arrival and departure boards blinked rapidly, listing destinations and delays, green and red letters flickering like a living heartbeat. At Gate B12, passengers gathered for Atlantic Airlines Flight 788 to Chicago. Some stood in line, some sat hunched over their phones, others flipped through magazines or watched the clock. Near the front of the business class line stood Audrey Hayes. Almost 50, she had the quiet confidence of a woman who had worked hard, earned respect, and held her head high. She had just wrapped up a grueling 3-day legal summit and was heading home for some much-needed rest. Her appearance was understated but elegant: black tailored trousers, a sleek vest, and comfortable low-heeled shoes. No flashy jewelry, just a refined leather bag beside her carry-on and a discreet, expensive-looking watch on her wrist. She traveled alone, without security detail or fanfare, preferring privacy over attention. As she waited, she scrolled through important legal documents on her tablet, making the most of every second. A few steps behind Audrey stood Mrs. Abigail Prescott, a woman who oozed money and superiority from every pore. In her 60s, draped in designer labels and sparkling with diamonds, she looked every bit the image of white privilege. Her face, caked in makeup, twisted into constant annoyance. She checked her watch every few seconds, sighed dramatically, and glared at the crowd around her. Her eyes eventually settled on Audrey with a bitter frown, her thoughts loud even in silence. To someone like Prescott, a black woman in the business class line didn't compute. It went against her internal belief system, one where people like Audrey didn't belong in her space. She muttered just loud enough for those nearby to hear. These days, anyone can claim priority. Ridiculous. Her disdain was clear, but she didn't stop there. Deciding to take her entitled racism up a notch, she marched straight to the gate agent's desk, batting her lashes and turning her voice syrupy with faux charm. "Excuse me," she said sharply. "Why am I waiting with people like that?" She pointed, openly and unapologetically, at Audrey. "She's been eyeing my luggage. I don't feel safe. Are you sure she's even supposed to be in business class? Someone like that could have faked her way in." The young gate agent was caught off guard, her face turning red as she fumbled to explain that Ms. Hayes was indeed a verified business class passenger. But Prescott waved her off, continuing her loud, baseless accusations. Her tone turned even nastier, her language more pointed. She wanted Audrey gone. That's when officers Dave Riley and Sean Baxter showed up. They'd been patrolling nearby, and the commotion caught their attention. Riley, the senior officer, had a face hardened by years on the job, and a gaze that gave away a lifetime of quiet prejudice. Baxter, younger and more hot-headed, followed closely behind, already sizing up Audrey like a suspect instead of a citizen. Prescott's eyes lit up as she saw them. In her twisted mind, this was her moment. She gestured at Audrey and hissed, "That's her. She's making me uncomfortable. You need to check her papers." What followed next would be the beginning of the officer's biggest downfall. Mrs. Prescott's demeanor shifted instantly. Her arrogant posture melted into a mock display of helplessness, her voice rising with fake concern. "Oh, thank goodness, officers," she whined, her tone syrupy but dripping with venom. "Please, you have to help me. That black woman, yes, her, she's been eyeing me and my bag in such a strange way. I feel unsafe flying with her." She jabbed her manicured finger in Audrey Hayes's direction, who stood silent and dignified, quietly observing the unfolding scene. Prescott didn't need facts, just fear. She weaponized the moment, knowing exactly how to stoke suspicion in a system already wired against women like Hayes. Her words were carefully chosen, her performance rehearsed in the theater of entitlement. And it worked. Officer Riley, whose mind was already clouded with prejudice, took one look at Hayes and believed every lie without hesitation. Officer Baxter, younger, more impulsive, mirrored his senior's reaction instantly, his eyes narrowed, his posture tense. They saw an opportunity to flex authority, not to investigate. To them, the issue wasn't whether the accusation was true. It was that someone like Audrey Hayes had dared to exist in a space they didn't believe she belonged. Without offering an explanation, they began moving toward her. Their footsteps were heavy, deliberate, designed to command silence and send a signal of control. The crowd instinctively parted, uncertain whether to be afraid, offended, or both. People stared. Some exchanged glances. Most remained quiet. Audrey noticed it all. "Ma'am," Riley said, his voice laced with fake professionalism masking an undertone of intimidation. "Would you step out of the line for a moment? We need to speak with you." Though taken aback, Audrey didn't flinch. She glanced calmly from Riley to Baxter, then to Prescott, who now stood with arms folded and a smug smile on her face like a queen who had just won a game of chess. Audrey understood this game. She'd seen it play out before. But she stepped forward anyway, with grace. "What seems to be the issue, officers?" she asked, her voice cool, measured, unwavering. "We received a complaint," Riley said sharply. "Another passenger believes you're acting suspiciously. We need to confirm your identity and verify your ticket." His tone made the accusation sound less like suspicion and more like a verdict, as if her guilt had already been decided the moment she stepped into that line. Without hesitation, Audrey opened her handbag and handed over her driver's license and business class boarding pass. "Here are my documents," she said clearly. "They're valid. Now I'd like to know, what exactly is the suspicious behavior I'm being accused of? And who made this complaint?" Her words were logical, legal, but Baxter took them as defiance. "You're asking too many questions," he snapped. "When police ask, you answer. That attitude, that's exactly what makes you look suspicious." Riley took her ID, glanced down at it, then back up at her. His eyes swept over her clothes, her calm demeanor, her neatly packed bag. "Audrey Hayes," he muttered. "Business class." A smug smirk crept across his face. "How does someone like you manage a ticket like this? What do you do for a living? Is this even your ticket?" The insinuation hit hard, racial, classist, deliberate. But Audrey didn't break. She didn't shrink. She stood taller. "I'm being interrogated based on prejudice and an unsubstantiated complaint," she said, locking eyes with Riley. "You have no lawful reason to treat me differently from anyone else standing here. My profession and how I paid for my ticket are none of your concern. I'm a U.S. citizen, a legal passenger with every right to be here. You are violating my civil rights and your own code of conduct." Her voice grew sharper, stronger. "Now I'm requesting the immediate return of my identification. And I want both your names and badge numbers." For a split second, the air between them held a silence so dense it felt like the entire terminal paused. Then, like a flame hitting fuel, Baxter exploded. "What did you say?" he barked, stepping closer to her, his face flushed. "You think you can lecture us? Who do you think you are? We're the law here. You think we're scared of some arrogant?" "Enough," Hayes said, her voice slicing through the noise like a blade. "This is harassment, and I will not stand for it." Riley lost his composure completely. His face twisted with rage, and the words that followed were no longer veiled threats. They were open racism. "You think you're smart, huh?" Another loudmouth lawyer with a chip on her shoulder. "Let me tell you something. You're not getting on that plane today. In fact, you might be leaving in cuffs." And then, just like that, the slurs began. Loud, vile, unapologetic. Right in front of everyone. Their shouting echoed through the terminal like a warning bell. Passengers gasped, some turned away in horror. Others froze, caught between fear and disbelief. Yet still, no one intervened. The gate became a stage for public humiliation. Two men in uniform, armed with badges and unchecked egos, cornering a woman whose only crime was standing with pride while black. But what they didn't realize, what they would soon come to regret, is that Audrey Hayes wasn't just any woman. She was Judge Audrey Hayes. And their careers were already over. They just didn't know it yet. No one dared to intervene. The passengers stood frozen, gripped by a mix of fear, disbelief, and helplessness. A few whispered, some pulled out their phones, but most simply watched. The gate agent hesitantly stepped forward, clearly uncomfortable with how far things were going. "Officers, maybe we can just..." But before he could finish, Riley waved him away like a bothersome insect. "Step back," Riley snapped. "We're handling this." And just like that, any hope of de-escalation vanished. Not far away, Mrs. Prescott stood like a villain from a courtroom drama. Arms crossed, lips curled into a smug smile. She'd done what she came to do. Stir the pot, unleash chaos, and have the woman she envied and despised taken away in chains. Audrey Hayes had committed no crime but dared to exist in the same space, and that was enough for Prescott to strike. Hayes, though her insides burned with humiliation and rage, managed to maintain her dignity. Her posture never sagged. Her voice stayed calm but firm. "You've gone too far," she said, staring directly at Riley. "And you will be held accountable. For every word, every action. The law doesn't protect abusers." Riley scoffed at her warning, his eyes burning with misplaced power. "Let's see who's responsible now," he growled. "You're under arrest. Arrest her, for disturbing the peace, refusing lawful commands, and threatening flight safety." He barked the fake charges like a man trying to justify his abuse of power. And in a flash, Baxter sprang forward like a hunting dog let off the leash. He grabbed Hayes's arm with unnecessary force. She flinched, but made no move to resist. She knew better. They wanted a struggle. They wanted to say she fought back. "You have no right to do this," she said, her voice rising with clarity and fire. "Let go of me." But Baxter ignored her completely. He twisted her arms behind her back, pulled the cold steel handcuffs from his belt, and snapped them onto her wrists, tight enough to dig into her skin. The pain was real, but the deeper wound was the public shame. The crowd stared, horrified and silent, as a woman, distinguished, intelligent, entirely innocent, was paraded like a criminal. She hadn't threatened anyone. She hadn't broken any rule. She had simply dared to stand her ground. And now she was being led away in handcuffs at Gate B12. Her name unknown to most, but her strength unmistakable. Riley crossed his arms, watching her with the twisted satisfaction of a man who believed he had crushed someone beneath his boots. He continued muttering racial slurs under his breath, unaware that every word was being burned into the memory of those around him. Mrs. Prescott couldn't hide her grin. Her eyes gleamed with victory as if she had eliminated a threat to her privileged world. "Move," Baxter barked, shoving Hayes from behind. She stumbled slightly, but regained her balance quickly. Her hands were bound. Her body ached. But her spirit did not break. She lifted her chin and walked forward with every ounce of dignity she could muster. They didn't lead her toward the plane. They marched her away, through terminal corridors packed with travelers, through whispers and camera flashes, through waves of humiliation, to the cold, lifeless hallway leading to the airport police station. It was the walk of shame. And still she did not cry. By the time they arrived at the station, a cramped, impersonal office tucked into the far corner of the terminal. The humiliation had peaked. Riley and Baxter shoved her through the door. As the weight of the scandal spread like wildfire through the media and federal corridors, investigators moved swiftly to lock down every piece of evidence. Every airline employee, security staff member, and traveler present at Gate B12 during the incident was identified and interviewed. But one name shot straight to the top of the priority list: Mrs. Abigail Prescott, the woman whose smug lies and toxic entitlement had triggered this entire disaster. Investigators traced her immediately. If she hadn't yet boarded her flight, she would be detained on site. If she had, authorities were already coordinating with law enforcement at her destination. There would be no escape. No business-class cocoon could shield her now. She would face questioning for false statements, inciting police action based on prejudice, and intentionally manipulating law enforcement with racially biased slander. When confronted with the evidence, body cam footage, surveillance recordings, and multiple witness testimonies, including statements from Riley and Baxter who, now desperate to save themselves, threw her under the bus, Prescott's arrogance cracked like thin ice under pressure. The entitled smirk faded. Her confidence withered. No longer the woman gleefully watching Hayes being paraded away in handcuffs, Prescott now appeared small, fragile, and panicked. Her weak denials rang hollow. She was informed clearly. If prosecuted, she could face federal charges for making false statements to authorities, a serious crime with real prison time. She was no longer a harmless bystander. She was a co-conspirator in a racially charged abuse of power, and the justice system was bearing down on her. But while immediate damage control was underway, real justice had only just begun to uncoil its power. A joint investigation by Airport Police Internal Affairs and the FBI's Civil Rights Division launched within hours. The findings were explosive. The evidence wasn't just strong, it was damning. Security camera feeds, body cam footage, and consistent testimonies from multiple eyewitnesses, including Judge Hayes, built an airtight case of racial profiling, unlawful arrest, and gross misconduct. Abigail Prescott's role wasn't just incidental, it was pivotal. Her lies had lit the match, and officers Riley and Baxter had poured gasoline all over it with their unchecked aggression and blind prejudice. The conclusion of the investigation came down with the weight of a hammer. The airport police chief, visibly shaken by the revelations, acted decisively. Both Riley and Baxter were not just suspended, they were fired. Permanently. Their badges and weapons had already been stripped, but the professional disgrace was just the beginning of what awaited them. Because this wasn't just a case of bad policing. This was a federal offense involving the illegal arrest of a sitting federal judge. The U.S. Attorney's Office took up the case. The charges? Violating civil rights under color of law, unlawful detention, and conspiracy to violate civil rights, heavy, career-destroying, reputation-shattering felonies. The trial of Dave Riley and Sean Baxter was a national spectacle. The courtroom was packed with reporters, legal analysts, and activists. Prosecutors came armed with a mountain of evidence. The damning video clips, the chilling audio of Riley's sneering accusations, the undeniable physical aggression captured from Baxter's body cam, and the cool, unshakable testimony of Judge Hayes herself. The defense tried, but there was no arguing with the truth laid bare. The jury took little time. The verdict: guilty on all counts. When the judge handed down the sentence, he didn't hold back. He called the case a terrifying example of power poisoned by prejudice, and emphasized the catastrophic consequences of law enforcement acting on hate instead of evidence. He acknowledged that sentencing 2 former officers to federal prison, each for 4 years, would be seen by some as excessive. But he reminded the courtroom that the law must speak loudly when its own guardians betray it. This wasn't just about Audrey Hayes. It was about the people they could have harmed next, had they not been stopped. It was a warning and a reckoning. As for Abigail Prescott, her fate was sealed through quieter means. Her attorneys knew there was no winning a trial. With overwhelming evidence and the looming threat of a massive civil lawsuit from Judge Hayes, one that could bankrupt her and further drag her name through the mud, Prescott agreed to a deal. She pled guilty to a reduced charge of making false statements to authorities and was slapped with a brutal financial penalty, a $500,000 fine. $500,000. More than enough to strip away the smugness that had once defined her. Her name would forever be associated with one of the most disgraceful racial profiling cases in airport history. Justice had been served, but not in a single stroke. It came through layers. Through firings, arrests, courtroom testimony, and public accountability. This wasn't just a punishment. It was a warning flare to every badge, every uniform, every citizen who thought they could weaponize race or position. The message was clear. Abuse your power, and that power will turn against you. And through it all, Chief Judge Audrey Hayes remained unshaken. She returned to her chambers not as a victim, but as a symbol. She had been humiliated in front of hundreds, yes. She had been handcuffed, slandered, dragged through a terminal like a criminal. But they had failed to break her. If anything, they had strengthened her. She would continue her work from the bench with even greater resolve. To ensure that justice wasn't just something spoken in courtrooms but lived in real life. The system had nearly failed her. But in the end it did what it was supposed to do. And tomorrow, as always, she would rise again. For every soul who couldn't. For every face silenced by fear. For every name without a title. And this time, the world would be watching. As the storm of headlines swept through every major outlet and federal channel. The incident at Gate B12 quickly escalated from a local disturbance to a national scandal. Investigators wasted no time. Every airline staff member, security officer, and nearby traveler was tracked down and questioned. But among all the names, one stood out immediately, Mrs. Abigail Prescott. She wasn't just a witness. She was the matchstick that had lit the fuse. Her statements, laced with bias and entitlement, weren't just harmful. They were the trigger that launched a federal judge into handcuffs. Time was critical. If Prescott was still in the airport, she would be held for questioning. If she had boarded her flight, federal agents were already coordinating to intercept her upon landing. There would be no smooth landing, no calm exit. Her version of events was about to collapse. She was being investigated for misleading authorities, inciting action based on inaccurate claims, and making statements that could be considered intentionally harmful. What came next left no room for ambiguity. When investigators confronted her with the collected evidence, footage from surveillance cameras, recordings from body-worn cameras, and first-hand witness statements, it was clear her narrative didn't hold. Even the two officers involved, desperate to reduce their own accountability, revealed her role in shaping the initial assumptions. Her attitude, once bold and condescending, began to unravel. Gone was the self-assured demeanor. In its place stood someone rattled, unsure, and struggling to respond. Her voice faltered. Her explanations changed. She was warned plainly. The charges she faced were real and serious. Misleading federal officers is no minor mistake. It's a charge that brings real consequences. And yet, her case was only a piece of a much larger puzzle. A joint inquiry between the airport's internal affairs team and the Civil Rights Division of the FBI was already in motion. Within hours, a team of legal experts and investigators began piecing together the full timeline. And what they found was nothing short of disturbing. There was no ambiguity. The video footage, officer audio logs, and testimonies created a clear pattern. Racial assumptions had clouded judgment, leading to an unlawful arrest and a misuse of authority. Mrs. Prescott's misleading statements had lit the fire, but officers Dave Riley and Sean Baxter had willingly added fuel, escalating a misunderstanding into a federal rights violation. The conclusion was swift and firm. The police chief overseeing airport security did not hesitate. In a press conference that drew national attention, he announced the permanent removal of Riley and Baxter from their positions. Their authority was gone. Their careers were over. But that was only the beginning of their legal journey, because the person they wrongfully detained wasn't just any traveler. She was a high-ranking federal judge. And this wasn't just misconduct, it was a breach of federal law. The U.S. Attorney's Office, after reviewing the facts, pressed forward with prosecution. Riley and Baxter were charged with multiple counts: violation of civil rights under color of law, unlawful restraint, and conspiracy to deny someone their basic rights. The terms may have been legal, but the meaning was clear. This was a betrayal of their sworn duty, and they would answer for it in court. As the case moved into the courtroom, the spotlight intensified. Reporters, legal analysts, and civil rights advocates filled the gallery. The prosecution presented a timeline that left little room for doubt. They showcased the video, the body camera footage, the moment-by-moment breakdown of events. The courtroom listened as Judge Hayes calmly explained what happened to her that day. How she, despite her position, had been treated with suspicion and disregard. Her voice didn't crack. Her story didn't change. She spoke with a measured calm that gave weight to every word. The defense tried to shift the focus, to paint the situation as a misunderstanding. But the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for only a short time. The verdict? Guilty on all counts. During sentencing, the judge overseeing the case addressed the courtroom with solemn clarity. He spoke of responsibility, of trust placed in public officials, of the danger posed when that trust is broken. He acknowledged the seriousness of the charges and the impact of the actions taken. He stated clearly, prejudice, when combined with power, is a threat to justice itself. Riley and Baxter were each sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. The message was clear, not only to them, but to anyone watching. Accountability matters. Meanwhile, Mrs. Abigail Prescott faced her own reckoning. Her legal team, aware of the weight of evidence and the growing possibility of a civil lawsuit from Judge Hayes, moved to negotiate. Prescott ultimately agreed to plead guilty to a reduced charge. In place of a drawn-out trial, she accepted a significant penalty, $500,000 in fines. For a woman once seen as untouchable in her social circles, it was a staggering fall. Her name, once associated with power and influence, was now linked to one of the most publicized profiling incidents in recent memory. But perhaps the most powerful part of this story wasn't the convictions, or the fines, or even the court's final ruling. It was what happened next. Because Judge Audrey Hayes didn't let the experience define her. She returned to the bench, not as a victim, but as a symbol of resolve. She didn't retreat. She pushed forward. And she did so not only for herself, but for everyone watching. For the ones who don't hold titles. For those whose voices go unheard. Her determination deepened. Her purpose sharpened. This story wasn't just about one moment in an airport. It was a larger call to attention. It reminded the world of how quickly judgment can fail when it's based on appearance, not fact. Of how systems break when they forget the humanity of the people they serve. And of how vital it is for those in power to be held to account. Not just for justice, but for trust to be restored. Justice didn't come in one grand act. It came step by step, through action, through transparency, through truth. And for every person watching this unfold, it sent one very clear message. Dignity can be threatened, but it cannot be taken. Not when people stand up and demand better. And Judge Hayes? She didn't just survive. She rose.